Alors l'après-midi, donc, en effet, centré sur le niveau Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles. Alors, nous avons l'honneur et le plaisir d'accueillir à ce moment, donc, pour le début d'après-midi, Madame la ministre Glatigny, qui va donc introduire cet après-midi par une intervention. Et puis, ensuite, vont suivre 4 ateliers en parallèle. Ateliers en parallèle, donc vous pourrez en suivre 2 à sélectionner. On vous expliquera juste avant les ateliers un peu plus précisément comment faire. Mais donc 4 ateliers. Un atelier proposé par l'UMONS, donc qui tourne autour des démarches d'autonomisation des systèmes d'assurance qualité dans nos institutions. Donc le premier atelier est présenté par l'UMONS. Le second est présenté par 2 hautes écoles, donc Enalux et Elmo. Le troisième atelier est présenté pour IFOSUP par Ariel Boucher et Dimitri de Flandre. Et enfin, le 4e atelier par l'ULiège. Donc, à votre choix, donc 2 ateliers à sélectionner. Ensuite, pour clôturer l'après-midi, nous allons parler bien quand même de la phase pilote qui se clôture en 2023 et donc nous entrons dans la construction d'un nouveau modèle d'évaluation de la qualité en Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, donc qui est encore à réfléchir. C'est bien pour ça que nous allons discuter aujourd'hui là-dessus. Donc c'est Cathy Deukert qui va vous donner des éléments de bilan de cette phase pilote. Et puis, Sandrine et moi, nous reviendrons pour vous ramener les résultats de la consultation des instances, les convergences qui en sortent. Vous savez qu'il y a eu une consultation, enfin, où je vous apprends qu'il y a eu une consultation des instances. Et donc, nous allons vous rapporter les convergences que l'on peut sortir donc, entre toutes les instances des différentes institutions qui concernent l'enseignement supérieur. Et puis, il y aura un drink de clôture.
Voilà, donc il me revient de terminer l'introduction et de vous souhaiter à tous et à toutes une bonne journée avec plein d'échanges et au plaisir d'échanger avec vous tous aussi.
Bonne journée.
Donc bonjour à tous. Si vous avez lu le programme au fur et à mesure qui s'est construit, vous avez vu qu'il y avait un petit changement d'orateur. Madame Enora Benetto-Prouveau, qui devait normalement présenter ce point-ci, a eu un empêchement et très gentiment, sa collègue Nino Popkhadze, qui est Policy and Project Officer à l'UEA, a accepté de la remplacer. Pour cela, nous la remercions et nous remercions aussi l'UEA d'avoir fait le maximum pour trouver quelqu'un pour présenter ce point lors de cette journée. Nino Popkhadze est l'un des 3 auteurs du Scorecard. Alors, Scorecard, je n'ai pas vraiment trouvé de traduction en français. Disons que c'est quelque chose entre le tableau de bord, la cartographie et le baromètre. Donc, suivant les moments, j'appellerai ça tableau de bord, Scorecard, voilà. Donc, Nina est l'un des 3 auteurs de ce tableau de bord de l'autonomie, avec Enora Benetto et Thomas Esterman. Ce que Nina va faire, heureusement ou malheureusement, on est très content qu'elle soit là, c'est que l'intervention sera en anglais. Mais ne vous tracassez pas, les questions, vous pourrez tout à fait les poser en français. On a David qui est ici, qui pourra jouer l'intermédiaire entre Nina et la salle. Donc voilà, on fera le maximum pour que ce soit compréhensible par tout le monde. Donc ce que va faire Nino, c'est Nino en fait, hein. Nino, c'est vous présenter les principaux enseignements de cette 3e édition du tableau de bord sur l'autonomie des universités réalisé par l'UEA. Hein. Pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, l'UEA représente 850 universités et conférences nationales de recteurs dans 49 pays européens. Et en Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, par exemple, les 6 universités et le CREF en sont membres. L'UEA, enfin le scorecard, le tableau de bord de l'UEA sur l'autonomie des universités a été lancée pour la première fois, si je ne me trompe pas, en 2011, avec pour objectif d'offrir une méthodologie pour collecter, comparer et mesurer les données sur l'autonomie des universités. Ce cadre de référence se veut, ce cadre conceptuel, on va plutôt dire ça comme ça, se veut donc une référence permettant de répondre à la demande de comparabilité et de benchmarking à travers les frontières. Voilà, et il se veut aussi la concrétisation, c'est toujours très difficile à dire pour moi, des discussions autour de la gouvernance universitaire et de l'autonomie institutionnelle qui sont considérées comme une condition préalable pour que les universités modernes remplissent efficacement leur mission. Je répète, voilà. Donc je pense que de tout ça, on aura l'occasion de discuter et de débattre après l'intervention de Nino. Et donc je vais tout de suite lui laisser la parole et je reviendrai vers vous pour les questions à la fin de son intervention.
Thank you. I'm not a huge fan of microphones, so I hope you can hear me. I'm Nino. I represent UA and I work on the scorecard, so therefore I'm one of the closer. Really apologies for not being able to deliver a presentation in French, but I'm learning, so maybe next year. In this presentation, in the beginning, I will try to first set the scene for those who are not familiar with the concept and the methodology of Autonomie scorecard. And the second part of the presentation will be geared towards more academic autonomy, because I know that it's in your particular interest. And I will try to bring comparative overview of Flanders and Francophone Belgium, as well as some European systems for you to have a better comparability. And then if you have any questions, I will be glad to answer. So what's UA's Autonomie scorecard? Back in 2008, 2009, there was a big discussion about efficiency, performance of universities, autonomy, accountability. And the UA tried to frame the discussion, and that's how we came up with the methodology with involvement of national rectors' conferences. And we would like to say that it's for the sector by the sector, because it was very inclusive process. We decided that it was time to have something, a guiding framework, the methodology that could compare data regarding autonomy. And that's how we came up with 4 dimensions that I will be explaining shortly. What we do, in fact, that we are studying the relationship between public universities and state, or external authority, if you will. We try to benchmark the regulatory framework. And having said that, I come from Georgia, so I should know better. I know that there are systems where institutional practices diverge or differ from the rule of law. And we know that in many systems there are different practices, and obviously we can't factor in every practice. So we decided that it's more straightforward if we take and build methodology and regulatory framework, because it's easier to compare systems. Although we know that it's not everything as linear as it may sound. So we provide European comparative data and also trends. And what we want to say by that there are many things that fall beyond the scope of Autonomie scorecard. So with the data collection, we have interviews. We try to look into the systems to make sure that we understand the context well, and also to capture the developments that are not really connected maybe with the indicators, but they are very important for the system. In this update, we have 35 higher education systems, and we are very proud because it's the most comprehensive report that we ever did. We acknowledge specificities, and this is very important because we know that systems are very different. Although, despite having so many guidelines, principles, and we are all part of Bologna process, we know that systems are very heterogeneous in Europe. If you take Belgium, for instance, we know we have different systems. If you take Switzerland, in cantons, everything differs. Also in Germany, so we know that they are very different systems across Europe, but at the same time we needed to have the common ground for comparability. So we are trying to find that ground, but also acknowledge the specificities of the systems. And by no means we do not promote one single model. So we don't say that this is the best way or all systems should have 100% of autonomy. It depends on the system, it depends on the context. For instance, there are many things that are societal choices. For instance, tuition fees. In certain Nordic contexts, for instance, they do not have tuition fees, and that's something historically been very important for the country, so it should be taken with grain of salt. And it should be taken with context. We do not say it's good or bad, we just judge the perspective of the university. So if universities can set the tuition fees, that would translate in lower autonomy, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. It's something that stands, and it's very important for the system. We do score and we do rank, and I will be explaining that shortly. But again, I want to say that please don't carry away with rankings, because rankings change, and depending how many systems we have, it may impact on the ranking. So it's not the most important things. It's good for benchmarking and comparison, but it should not be the main thing, and we do not put great emphasis on rankings. So these are the 4 dimensions that I will be explaining very shortly. First, organizational autonomy. So what we try to see if the university has the capacity to select the leadership. When we say leadership, if they can select the criteria, if they can recruit freely without involvement of external authority, if they can decide the term of office. Also, we are looking into the governing structures, although we do not measure, because it's something that institutional choice, whether it's dual system, if they have governing boards and also senates, or it's just unitary model. But what we actually score is if there are external members, who appoints external members? Is it state, or is it university, or maybe it's a boss at the same time? We also look into the academic structures, if universities have autonomy to open new academic structures without consulting external authority, or maybe there are different types of regulations. And at last but not least, with the emphasis of entrepreneurship, we know how important it is to have spin-off companies nowadays. So we are also looking if universities can open profit and non-profit organizations and legal entities. When it comes to financial autonomy, we are looking into the public funding allocation. So we see what is the type of public funding, what the lengths, if universities can move around funding. Then we are looking into the financial management. For instance, if universities can keep the surplus from public funding, although I know that it almost never happens these days because the universities are quite underfunded across Europe as a general trend. But in theory, also if they can borrow money on financial markets, and the real estate, if they can own the buildings, if can manage the buildings like selling or, for instance, closing down the buildings. And tuition fees, as I mentioned, we are measuring if universities can set tuition fees at bachelor, master, and doctoral degrees, and for national, EU, and non-EU students. For staffing, please keep in mind that we only measure senior academic and senior administrative staff. If universities can recruit senior academic and senior administrative staff, if they can set salaries, if they can dismiss, and if they can promote their staff. Here again, and one caveat I want to make is that, for instance, we have civil servant status in many systems. It's not that we are judging whether it's good or bad. It's something, again, societal choice. But if this is something that comes with benefits and challenges, for instance, benefits for staff because it's higher security, but when it comes for a university perspective, they have less leeway to decide on these matters. And cherry on top, academic autonomy. Quite often it's interchangeably used with academic freedom, but although they do share similarities, we call it academic autonomy. What we are looking into is that if universities can set the number, decide on the number of the students they take every year, if they can decide on the admission criteria, or maybe it's something that is entirely driven by external authority, if they can introduce as well as terminate programs independently, if they can choose language of instructor, which has become actually a very prominent issue nowadays, and if they can select QA mechanisms and as well as QA agencies, and last but not least, study program and content design, if they can freely design study contents. first of all, as a disclaimer, if you're really, really interested in the methodology, I invite you to check the report because we have a 20 pages long methodological note with all nitty-gritty details, but I will try to summarize here. So what we do that we score every indicator. And what we do is that every indicator has a deduction value based how restrictive the regulation is. For instance, we have here example of deciding on the student numbers. And if university can decide freely, then there's a zero deduction value, obviously. But if, depending, there are different modalities, maybe it's a cooperation model, maybe it's something that is freely out of hands of university. In this case, it's a free admission here, and it has the maximum deduction value, which is 5 points. And then that's how it's score calculated and the percentage. And in addition, we are weighting the scores. That was done by assessing the relative importance of the indicator, and that was based on the survey that took place in 2009 when they are trying to come up with a methodology, and the National Rectors Conferences, there we are 30 people, that's why in total you see 30. Took part, and they evaluated how important from their perspective this particular indicator was. For instance, some of them evaluated as very important, some fairly important, some not important. That was multiplied, and then that's how also the scores are calculated. We are also, having said that, we are aware that in certain systems, certain indicators may be more important than others. But again, we had to come up with the middle ground, so we could foster the comparability. So we are aware that there could be things that not every representative of the systems might feel the same about the indicators and their relative importance in their own systems. Yes. Okay, this is a beautiful table that I really like because that shows all the systems that ever participated in Autonomie Scorecard. You see that in 2023 we had the most systems, that's 35 that we covered, with 3 newcomers, Georgia, that I'm very proud, Scotland and Romania, and we had 4 returning systems that are Turkey, Cyprus, Greece, and Czechia. And for Wallonia-Brussels Federation, you see that it's only 2 times it participated, whereas for Flanders, it's been with us from the beginning. So that's one of the reasons I say that take with grain of salt ranking, because the participation changes, that impacts on the ranking. Now I will try to give you a bit of insights from the findings of the scorecard. So what we have seen that there have been some governance-related reforms across Europe. For instance, if you look at the table, you see that we had some reforms in Czechia, England, Luxembourg, Poland, Estonia. They are mainly governance-related reforms. For instance, in Luxembourg and Poland, there have been lots of changes, granting more autonomy to universities on organizational matters. We see some reforms like moving towards more dual governance from unitary models, so setting up a new governing body like boards with external members in it. And then obviously we have Next Generation EU, which is not country, but we know that COVID took very heavy toll on universities and funding, so we had Next Generation funding as a remedy to support universities. And then we had also in Latvia quite wide-ranging governance reform. And also while we were writing up the report, the new reforms took place in Croatia, Ireland, Slovakia, and some are in the pipeline that we are expecting that they will happen. Another trend that we observed is the landscape consolidation. We see mergers, many mergers, number of mergers took place in France, in Ireland, in Greece, in Norway, Finland. So we see that there is an attempt to align systems better. Another main theme was European University Initiative, because we know that there's a huge political emphasis on transnational cooperation, which comes with benefits and challenges, and I will be elaborating further later on. And for the issues that we see as something that remains as a challenge is underfunding. We see that more targeted funding is increasing, more structural funds instead of increasing public funding allocation, for instance. We see increasing ad hoc state interventions, which means that there is more tendency towards micromanagement when the interventions in the governance happens outside from regulatory frameworks. For instance, good example is performance agreements when they have one mission, but also they are used as the way for external authority to steer universities towards certain objectives. And we know there's geopolitical tensions. War in Ukraine also had quite some influence on the knowledge security. We know that certain systems adopted guidelines which affected the collaborations of the universities with their counterparts from China, Russia, Korea, etc. And the COVID took heavy toll, as I mentioned, on universities and especially on academic autonomy, because we know that the modalities of studies and learning and teaching have changed quite severely. We see at the same time that accountability, there is a more emphasis on accountability and the leadership, because we know that in order to be able to reap the benefits of high autonomy, you should have also good skill sets to be able to take all the benefits of the high autonomous universities, and I will be elaborating on that as well. So first of all, I know that the tables would attract your eyes immediately, so I will explain. So you see two tables. I want to make sure that what you see on the left side is non-community universities in Francophone part of Belgium, and this is something that is factored in the scorecard. What you see on the right side, this is community-governed universities. It does not exist in the scorecard. We just rendered the analysis for you today. So this is virtual rank, as you see. We just did it for you to have a bit of comparative analysis. When it comes to non-community university, you see that there's quite diverse situation when it comes to scores. It scores quite high on organizational autonomy. Therefore falls under the high cluster, but when it comes to financial staffing autonomy, it represents medium-low cluster, and when it comes to academic autonomy, it falls under the low cluster. The situation is somewhat similar when we take community-governed universities, with exception of organizational autonomy, because you see that on that matter they fall under the low category, medium-low category. The rest remains almost the same. For the insights from Brussels Wallonia Federation, we see that there's no major legal changes. We know that there have been some attempts to consolidate system, but it has been pending so far. We see that the universities are considered part of wider group of providers like AEQES. We know there continues to be closed envelope principle, which is the money follows student, that could be challenging for universities because it promotes also competition, and when you can't have the leeway to decide on number of students, that could be also challenging, and there are some obstacles to internationalization with regard to language of instruction, and I will elaborate on that. This is something we are trying this year, and they will be in the country profiles that we are in the process of developing country profiles right now. So upper part, if you look and concentrate, I want to draw your attention to the upper part. You see Flanders on the left side, and you see Francophone part on the right side. So you see that actually the only dimension in which Francophone Belgium scores higher is organizational dimension, and the rest Flanders have better positioning or better standing, let's put it like that way. And also, because of this diamond's a bit skewed, and you see that it's a bit more full-fledged, but this is not, you see that because of the numbers, it's a bit skewed. If you focus on the below, you see some comparison with other systems like Sweden, Austria, Ireland, Finland. And you see, probably I want to draw attention to the fact that there is no perfect model. We see that some systems score high in certain areas, but they also very good and very high-performing systems otherwise score very differently. So again, we do not have perfect model. Things are different. They reflect their own context. So that's why it's not important the score itself, but to know a bit more understanding of the context. Now focusing on academic autonomy. So first of all, what was the main trends that we saw from the academic autonomy? That there are some tensions around internationalization, and this is very interesting because we see this growing interest, political interest on transnational cooperation, but at the same time, it's been very challenging because more systems are facing some issues. For instance, in Denmark, which has very long-standing history with internationalization, they had to put a cap on English programs. The rationale is more connected to funding because in Denmark, students coming from EU are entitled to get funding similar to national students. So in order to curb the influx, they decided to cap the programs. So they can't have many programs on English in English language. And obviously, if they want to be part of consortia, this could be one of the challenging aspects. If we go to, for instance, we know in Flanders, there are a certain amount. For instance, if I'm not wrong, and correct me if I am 9% at bachelor level and 35% of programs can be only in English. We know that there are certain credits that allows in Francophone Belgium to have programs in English. So there are certain things that could have implications on transnational cooperation, in addition to the, the accrediting, the programs, etc. We see slow pace of transition towards external QA, and I won't be talking much because we know that we have presentation from AEQES, but we do see that there is this attempt to move towards to institutional accreditation, but good number of systems still have both, so they do program accreditation as well as institutional accreditation, and sometimes on top of that they have different types of regulations like licensing or study fields, etc. So systems, this is very slow process at what we have observed. And we see some growing interest from government for the contents and organizing their academic and research offers. Very recently, and this is something, again, outside of regulatory framework. For instance, in Estonia, they have new role in the performance agreement that now programs have to be, if they want to have a program in English, they need to have equivalent in Estonian with the intention to preserve Estonian language. So we see the different types of intervention from different types of tools to steer universities to certain directions again. Now I will try to zoom in a little bit on our indicators for you to have a better understanding. So overall student numbers, as I mentioned, explained here, we try to see if universities have leeway, liberty to decide on this matter. And as you can see, we have different types of models, and we have like five modalities, let's put it this way. We see that almost one quarter of systems have exclusive liberty to decide on student numbers. As you can see, it's Estonia, for instance, UK, England, Scotland. And then we see that 5 numbers from Georgia, Croatia, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania. We have this type of model when universities decide on fee-paying students and the state decides on the state-funded places. Then we have a negotiation model when 1/3 of systems fall under this category. And this is something that negotiation always takes place each year. Then we have 3 systems when the exclusive decision is with the hand of the state, external authority. That's relevant for Greece, Serbia, and Turkey. And the last is the free admission system, which means that it's out of hands of universities. And in this case, you would notice that both parts of Belgium, both systems of Belgium is here, as well as Switzerland, France, and Netherlands. So our neighbors plus Switzerland. I hope you can see the map and the color, because you see that it's very diverse, and it would come handy for the next map to compare, because we see that almost the same number of systems fall under the category when universities can freely decide on admission at bachelor level. And then we have a second model in which there's a collaboration between universities and external authority. And then we see the third model, which I would say 1/4 of systems fall under this category, among which both parts of Belgium feature, is when admissions are entirely regulated by external authority. So you see the colors are mainly well distributed, with exception of the purple, because it's a less systems fall here. But now if we go to the master degree level, the interesting part is that orange color becomes dominant, which means that more university, almost 2/3 of universities, have liberty to decide on the admission criteria at master level. And we see a bit less than the 1/4 still maintain the cooperative model in which state and universities cooperate together. And I would like to draw your attention to the third one. The admissions are entirely regulated by external authority, in which only Francophone Belgium and Switzerland feature. Introducing new programs. We know this is very important part of academic, to make your academic offer. And we have also here different, let's say, 4 main modalities. First, when universities can open degree programs, and we are talking about academic degrees and not professional degrees. Without any prior accreditation, we see 1/4 of systems are here, like Austria, Ireland, Norway, Sweden, England, Scotland. We see the second group under which fall Spain, Georgia, and Netherlands, where all degree programs must be submitted to accreditation if they want to get funded. Then we have all new degree programs must be submitted to prior accreditation to be introduced, and as you can see, both parts of Belgium falls under this category, and in total it's like 1/3 of the systems. And then there's other systems that have different types of regulations, for instance, maybe study fields that they need to have, they are free to open, but only in the study fields that are pre-accredited for them. So as you can see, the situation is also different across Europe, and it's not, it's very heterogeneous. When it comes to language of instruction, as I said, it has been very important. There has been a discussion about language of instruction because of the transnational cooperation. We see that in general, what we see primarily, more systems have liberty to decide on the language of instruction, but also good number, like 16 when it comes to bachelor level, and 14 still are subject to different types of regulations, among which again feature both Belgian systems. And I will finish, and I promise. Then we have the capacity to select quality assurance providers. While it's very rare when systems can decide on the quality assurance mechanism across Europe, it's like only minority systems that have this. When it comes to quality assurance providers, we see that, for instance, 10 has the liberty to decide in this case, and usually that's something that is AEQES registered agencies. And the rest still have the obligation to first have the accreditation with the national agency, and then if they please, they can also have extra accreditation from different types of agencies. And this is something we are trying. This is a traffic light system. Again, please take it with a grain of salt. What we want to show you is that if there's a green, it means that universities can decide on this matter without any significant restriction. If it's yellow, it means that there are some restrictions that apply. And if it's red, it means that it's out of hands of universities. And as you can see, when it comes to Belgium, that's Flanders as well as Wallonia-Brussels Federation, we see a bit more dominant color is red, which means that they are subject to different types of restrictions. You see that only in case of Ireland, we see the green, which is also dominant, but the rest is quite diverse. So we do not have the perfect model to promote, but there are different types of modalities. But it's definitely clear that Belgian universities in both parts of Belgium remain quite constrained to some extent. Yeah, I'm finishing. This is the map that we have, a cluster map. You see that's how many systems fall into the different categories. Again, it's very diverse, with exception of low category when we have only 2 systems, Wallonia, Brussels Federation, and Greece. And we see some, before that also Flanders and France, they were part of the low cluster, but because there is no ban anymore on introducing new programs in Flanders, it has been moved up, and there has been some change when it comes to admission to cooperation models, so France also moved up. And last, what we want to say that autonomy goes hand in hand with accountability. So we do not promote that all systems should have 100% of autonomy. No, you should have very fully fledged accountability frameworks in place as well. Again, as I said, autonomous universities require strong leadership, so the skills are very important. We know that sustainable funding is very important to remain very efficient and to deliver on their missions for universities. Regulations does not mean that everything should be in law. We see some examples, for instance, in England and Scotland, they have codes, which means like comply or explain. So if you are free to diverge, to have your own practice, but you have to explain. So not everything needs to be in the law. And at last, institutional vision is very important because that frames everything. And thank you. I hope I did not bore you. And that I will finish with that slide. Thank you.
Merci Nino. Merci. Ça permet, je pense que ça va permettre la discussion. Puisque ce genre de scores, cartes, je pense avec des indicateurs, des choix d'indicateurs, des résultats qu'on tire de certains indicateurs, je pense que ça va pouvoir lancer la discussion dans la salle. Et je pense que Nino y répondra éventuellement avec l'aide de David. Je ne sais pas si vous avez déjà des questions. Ou sinon... Mais moi, j'avais peut-être une première question, mais je vais laisser d'abord la salle, s'il y a des candidats. Mais moi, j'avais peut-être une première question, puisque si on regarde le site internet qui présente cette enquête, il est clairement indiqué que l'autonomie institutionnelle est considérée comme une condition préalable pour que des universités remplissent leur mission au vu des résultats d'ici. Est-ce que vous pouvez un peu nous expliquer en quoi c'est une condition préalable pour remplir correctement une mission pour une université ? Est-ce qu'il est bon ? C'est la condition pour... c'est une condition préalable pour que les universités remplissent efficacement leur mission, ce qui est... Voilà, mais c'est avancé comme ça, donc... Voilà.
Thank you for the question. What we say that there are different autonomy. We know that it's sine qua non. It has to be, but it's very hard. It's very elusive concept, so it's really hard to define. But what we believe that autonomy is necessary to deliver on their own missions. They need flexible governance. If everything they need to consult to external authority, then that's not flexible anymore. They need funding. If they have very high degree of autonomy but very low funding, they can't do anything. They need good HR strategies. They should be able to hire relevant candidates for their own academic offer they are making. So it's the combination, everything. It's a synergetic process. It's not one thing you need to have. It's in combination, everything. That's how we say, and that's why we always promote the very holistic approach and not like one point that is you must have this and then you are safe. It's a work in progress, but it's something that needs to be many things together.
Merci. Alors, toujours pas de candidat pour poser une question. N'hésitez pas, vous pouvez la poser en français. Peut-être résumer la réponse en français? Alors ça, je vais laisser David faire la réponse.
Ah bon Non, grosso modo, ce qui est important évidemment pour les établissements, c'est l'autonomie doit leur permettre de déployer toute leur capacité de s'intégrer dans un paysage d'enseignement supérieur. Et donc leur approche par rapport à l'autonomie académique est plus une approche holiste et comprehensive approach, actually. Et donc, voilà, c'est en grosso modo ce que Nino vient d'exposer. On peut aussi prendre place, hein, c'est beaucoup plus confortable.
Moi j'avais une question mais alors de compréhension, parce que je n'avais pas bien saisi la différence. Alors, peut-être que dans la salle vous l'avez compris, vous allez pouvoir me l'expliquer vous, mais je n'avais pas bien compris la différence entre non-community et community government institution, je crois que c'était les deux titres.
Yes, so we observed that we know that you have community-governed universities. I'm no expert, by the way, but I was during the interview process, and I know that you have community-governed universities and non-community-governed universities, and when we measure the extent to which they have the capacity to decide on various matters, we see that actually non-community universities rank higher, because when it comes to, for instance, organizational matter, there are no regulations about selection, no restrictions, let me put it this way, to select their leadership, to decide on the criteria, also the procedure to dismiss. They are free to set up their own academic structures as well as legal entities. So we see that they have this type of freedom, although when it comes to external members in the governing structure, we know that if it's external members, then they are appointed by external authority. That's something similar. And we know there's a unitary model, but when it comes to community-governed universities, then we see that it's more involvement of the external authority in the organizational, in the governance of the universities as compared to non-community. But if you look at the financial staffing and academic autonomy, we see almost same results. So situation does not really change with regard to these dimensions, only organizational, because they tend to have more liberty to decide on their own on various topics.
Vous aviez une question? Il y a une question tout au fond de la salle.
Yes, hello. Oops. I'm Geneviève Lefort, Vice Rector for Quality at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts of Western Switzerland, and also member of the Comité d'appui méthodologique of the AEQES. Thank you very much for this incredible and immense work that helps us all, but I have a question. What do you do with the results? Beyond just sharing the results, which is already extremely important also for us in our different countries, we can use it as, go to our politics and see here is how it is. So that is very important, but at the EUA level, do you do anything with the results in terms of lobbying, trying to push something?
Thank you, Genevieve. We have met we met actually in Poland, I remember, during the EUA conference, so it's a pleasure seeing you again. That's a very good question, because, yeah, it matters what you do with the results. So what we have seen so far, that it's been informing policy debates at national levels, at EU levels. We do not say that we have a magic formula that if you do that, you will have the highest performing universities, high degree of autonomy, but what we say that we try to give them the comparative analysis, and we can say, okay, what is your benchmark, which is your country? Let's see, let's look into the context. Maybe this is better to compare because of the size of the system, etc. And we have one-to-one meetings. For instance, we know that Slovenians are trying reform, and they had a meeting with us. They consulted, they wanted to hear, because they are in the process of developing new law, and they wanted to increase autonomy. So they were very curious to know what can be done, although we do not have a recipe that if you follow this, then you will get somewhere. We try to give them very comprehensive analysis, the comparative overview, and we know that, for instance, we also try not only in EU, but we had in Kazakhstan, in different countries, they also try to increase their autonomy. We are right now working in Western Balkans to support their universities to increase autonomy with the methodology we have, and also also obviously factoring in the context, because that's very important. What works in Switzerland, and I know how complicated the situation is to make a one general point because cantons differ greatly. So we try to factor the context, and based on that we can give some advices, recommendations, but nothing like a formula or to say, okay, this is that. You need to become very autonomous, like there are many caveats to make. So we try our best to give information, and what they do with this information, then it's in their own hands. Thank you.
Monsieur devant avait une question. Peut-être vous présenter au moment où vous posez la question.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the very interesting insight. I'm Benoît Massé. I'm Head of Learning and Development for the Solvay Brussels School of Economics and Management, Université Libre de Bruxelles. Again, following, bouncing back on the last question, talking about impact, for the French-speaking part of Belgium, if you would have 3 recommendations to improve autonomy in this special part of Belgium, what would they be?
That's a tricky question.
I know.
First thing I actually forgot to mention is that if you look at the scores of Francophone Belgium, you see that they are stable, they do not change, which is an indication. I mean, I have to make a caveat that it doesn't mean that the system is stagnating, no, but by no means. It means that some developments fall beyond the scope of Autonomie Scorecard that we can't really capture because that's a limitation of the methodology. But, well, that would be really nice of me to say what should be done, but what I think that if you look at the map, you see the only reason why Francophone Belgium features and falls under the low cluster is because of the combination of restriction. So it should be, it's not because only one thing, because for instance at the language of instruction that you are very restricted, or free admission, that's the problem. No, that's a combination of everything. So it's something what matters for the system. What is more important, to have free admission or more choice when it comes to QA? So this something has to come from the community. What's better, because again, you are the community and it should be according to your own needs and not what, for instance, I think. But that's why I think you have to go through it and see, okay, maybe there could be some room for improvement or more freedom to have in certain areas, and that would change the situation, in my opinion.
So, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Sabine Soutoué. I'm coordinating the quality at the University of Mons. This afternoon, we will receive our minister. So my question is quite close to the previous one. What would you say to her to improve our system? Which would be the best decision or the best thing to promote if we want to get a better autonomy and maybe better fulfill our missions?
Thank you for the question. Again, we study the relationship between universities, public universities, to be more precise, and state, right? So it depends to what extent they interfere in your own governance, to what extent you feel that you are pressured. If you want to have more leeway to decide on certain matters that would create better, flexible environment to deliver on the missions, then that's where it should start a discussion. We know that state external authority interferes quite much in Francophone Belgium, so it's up to you as a university representative to feel it more the pressure than I would feel working for EUA. Yeah, if you think, as I presented, there are many red dots when it comes to Francophone. But I'm not saying that it's necessarily wrong or it should be changed to green. No, I'm not saying this. But maybe there's a room of improvement. Maybe they can interfere less on certain aspects, and something has to come with negotiation and collaboration with external authority. I think it's very important that it's a symbiotic process, so they also collaborate, intervene, and you have also a very good accountability framework. So, you know, using well autonomy is also important, and it can't be without having a good framework, a long-standing framework of accountability. So I think it should come from you, in which area you feel more pressured, that it's affecting your day-to-day life, and yeah.
Peut-être encore une question au fond de la salle.
Merci. Hi, thanks for the presentation. Je m'appelle Laurent Lepère, je travaille à l'ARES. I had a remark about the methodology, because there's the law and the law. What I mean about the language regulations is that in French-speaking Belgium, we can have exemptions to this law. And I've never seen or read that an exemption was refused. So, of course, the law says that every classes should be in French, but it's not really a strong law. Does your report take that into account?
Thank you for a question. Just, I was thinking about the funding system also in Frankfurt with an envelope system. Maybe that is something to be taken to the ministry, because that's very important for the system. Also, we have something similar in Georgia. As for the methodology, I totally agree. There is law and there's different types of, decrees that maybe do not have high degree of importance, but they also restrain universities. The point is that almost in most of the systems, there are exceptions one way or another. So if you all take this exception as okay, this means full liberty, then you can't compare. So we take what's literally written in the law, and we make a caveat. For instance, when it comes to deduction value, we would reduce the deduction value. So for instance, instead of putting 5 deduction value, and we know that there is good number of exceptions that happens in the system, then we put aside 2 points of deduction value. So we try to be very transparent with the methodology. That's why we have like 20 pages note, and every time we make an exception in the methodology to count something or to factor in, we have always note. So people have a bit of understanding. We have everything, all the deduction values are accessible. If you want to run your own analysis and use the methodology, that's the good thing. That's how usually scorecard is used, that people can take the methodology and apply to the systems. They are running lots of analysis. The other researchers, maybe I would be a bit more cautious, because again, these rankings and scores should be taken with grain of salt, but still, as for the benchmarking and to play with it, it's really nice. But yeah, we are still following the main guiding law that exists in the system.
Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a une toute dernière question? Il faut choisir. Il y a monsieur derrière, voilà.
Merci. Je m'appelle Emmanuel Nachi. Je viens de la haute école ICHEC et CAMI SFC. Alors j'espère avoir bien compris l'exposé. Mais si j'ai bien compris, je vois une forme de double bind, une sorte de double contrainte. L'idéal, c'est que les institutions deviennent le plus autonomes possible, c'est-à-dire qu'elles fassent les choses comme elles le voient avec leurs moyens. Mais en même temps, vous publiez des scores et des rankings pour leur dire voici comment il faut faire. Donc soyez autonomes, mais le meilleur moyen d'être autonome, c'est de perdre cette autonomie en faisant comme les autres. Est-ce que j'ai bien compris ?
I see the logic in the question, but at the same time, it helps to benchmark the system. So you need to have score to compare. So that's why we do scoring and we do ranking, because if you have score, if we don't do it, somebody else will do this, because if we publish the scores, then it's very easy to do ranking. What we want to raise awareness is that do not make big deal and don't get carried away with ranking, because again, in 2017 we had 29 systems. This year we have 35. Obviously, rankings will be impacted by the number of systems because it fluctuates. So it's not very linear that always at the same number of systems participate, so there will be the same, the ranking would be easier to compare over time. That's why we say that it's important, because you can benchmark And that's what scorecard serves. You can benchmark your system, and you can choose the other ones against which you want to be compared. But at the same time, this is not the main point. Like, we study context, we try to acknowledge the specificities, and we know that it's no one great model that should exist. That's why we say that, okay, we know that maybe we do ranking because the data is there, and if we don't do it, somebody else will do it. But we make caveat that, yeah, think about it, because it's not very linear. It should not be used as the main argument. And in the media, like, we know that media always takes, okay, France ranked this in this scorecard, etc. For media, that is something that is important because it attracts people. But for us, it's something for systems to be able to benchmark themselves against the others. So that's the only purpose we do rankings.
Merci Nino, merci à tous. Je pense que cette dernière question, comme toutes les questions que vous avez posées, permettront de continuer à en débattre éventuellement à la pause café.